Welcome, Gail. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
I'm very excited to talk to you about some of these topics because we've been covering some of these in the past few weeks in response to everything that's happening in the world. And one of the things that I wanted to sort of tap into your wisdom about is that I know, even for me personally, and I practice mindfulness, of course, but I am struggling with judging. And I know where it's coming from. I mean, I'm looking at people who are refusing to maybe wear a mask, or
Mm.
politicians that are arguing about things, or the big debate about schools, kids going back to school. And I keep finding myself judging. And of course, I notice it. And then I judge myself for judging. And so I just wondered if you could share some of your wisdom about how
Hmm.
better manage that judging mind that just gets going.
Wow, that's such a great question. Yeah, let's face it, our sometimes our minds can really be like human judging machines. We know that the human mind produces 20 to 50,000 thoughts on an average day. And when we start being more mindful and intentionally paying attention to that, we realize just how many of those thoughts are judgments about ourselves, about someone that we're interacting with, about somebody that we interacted with yesterday, or about our circumstances. And we all do it. It's perfectly normal. So there's nothing wrong with our mind being a judging mind. It's just that sometimes that takes us down to kind of dark alleys and keeps us from seeing the good in ourselves and in the people around us. So, as you're saying with mindfulness, that's fantastic that you're aware of your judging mind. That is the key, because if we're not aware of it, how could we possibly expect our mind to do something different? We have to be aware. It's almost like a diagnosis for me as a physician. We have to see what the mind is up to, diagnose what the mind is up to, and then we can work with our mind in a kind way to shepherd the mind and train the mind to look more for the good. Because after all, the judging mind, it's just the negativity bias that we know from an evolutionary standpoint served us, a long, long time ago, but now it really trips us up. So I think that's the key. I don't know what you think, but I find that's the key, just being aware and not judging the judging, because then we just pile on more of that judgment that we're trying to get away from. And it actually doesn't serve us particularly well.
Yeah, no, I do agree with that. And it becomes a cycle. I catch myself judging, then I judge myself for judging.
Mm,
Then it's almost like
mm,
judging myself for judging myself. And I
yes.
feel it starting to spiral. So then I have to stop and get recentered and
Yes.
try to reframe. And yeah, great.
Because when we can step out of the judging, there's so much goodness that's there. I've really noticed that with myself. I was on a loving kindness meditation retreat a couple of months ago, just before the pandemic hit. And we really practiced stepping out of judging mind and just stepping into the goodness. And I noticed when I came back, I was walking the dog one morning and I was kind of reciting loving kindness. May I be happy. May you be happy, directing it towards somebody that perhaps I was having difficulty with. And I was just so struck that before that retreat, I would have been walking the dog and I would have been having some conversation that was in my mind that was full of judgments. Why did she say what she said? Why doesn't she go do something different, with how she's dealing with her teenager? I would be so trapped in judgment. And that juxtaposition was so clear to me, because when I was more in touch with the loving kindness, I had so many good feelings toward that particular individual. And I think I could be a much better friend to that particular person when I'm rooted more in goodness than in the judgments.
Very true. Very true. And I do think the loving kindness meditations are so powerful. And many of our listeners have
Yes.
practiced them because we've done it through this program. So that's great advice.
That's wonderful.
Another thing I wanted to talk to you about is, we do workshops and now webinars actually, and webcasts, since we can't go anywhere yet. I understand
Right.
Boston's doing a little better than Los Angeles. We're pretty much stuck at home again right now.
Mm-hmm.
But we've been focusing on resilience and psychological flexibility.
Mm.
And the real reason behind it is we're hearing so much feedback about people's anxiety that
Mhm.
seems to be around all of the uncertainty. And so we're trying to get people to quit looking at it as an event happening, and more as this is sort of the norm and we need to learn how to
Mm.
better respond to it. And I know that you actually have a book coming out next month called Everyday Resilience. So congratulations on that. And
No, thank
I'm
you.
I was wondering if maybe in the meantime, since the book's not out yet, if you could share some practical advice or techniques people could use
Yeah.
in the meantime to help them really build on that resilience so that they can better manage the events that are occurring.
Yeah, so important, isn't it? We kind of have this myth that life will be certain. For so much of my career, I was a hospice physician. So I was dealing with people who were terminally ill, who had been dealt a really difficult hand, so to speak, they and their loved ones, and really had to face the fact that life wasn't so certain after all. People who found out that they were terminally ill and wouldn't go on to have that lovely retirement plan, traveling and moving to somewhere, with their spouse. And we have this illusion of certainty. And that, like the judging mind, I find really trips me up. And I feel like it trips other people up as well, because life isn't certain as much as we would like it to be. So I think a lot of living with uncertainty is reminding ourselves that a basic law of nature is that everything changes. Everything is impermanent. We are all of the nature to grow older, at some point to get sick. And we know that our loved ones eventually will die, but we try to avert that. And I think our society is very good at kind of pushing that away and creating this mythos. But it doesn't serve us well when we're actually facing the kind of uncertainty that we're facing now. So I think it's another area where we just have to remind ourselves this really isn't so different. Life always was uncertain, and we've done okay with that uncertainty. We've actually managed it. And even as we think about another surge potentially in the COVID-19 pandemic, we can look back on the last few months and see that we actually did manage that uncertainty. And how can we apply those same coping strategies and mechanisms as we move forward as a way of helping us as we feel anxiety about not knowing this, that, or the other thing? It's an effort. It's kind of brain retraining that we're involved in. And that's a lot of what mindfulness is really that awareness and working with our minds so that we don't suffer unnecessarily around things like the inevitability of change and uncertainty.
Mm, very true. Is there an activity or reflection or an exercise that someone could do, like something simple,
Hmm.
but to really sort of start building or strengthening their resilience?
Oh my goodness, there are so many, really so many. I think one of the most important exercises is a very simple one. It involves pausing. So you're feeling anxious, you're worried about the kids, whether they're going to go back to school or whether you and your loved ones are going to be safe or about your livelihood, normal concerns. And your mind starts racing, really going into some anxiety and potentially even some fight or flight. You're really revved up in an anxious state. If you can just be mindful and notice, oh, there goes my mind again, and take just a very brief time out. And in that time out, perhaps take 3 slow, deep breaths. It's a way of dampening the anxiety, dampening the fight or flight response, and kind of grounding you back in the reality of the moment. It also, taking those 3 deep breaths, brings you out of your mind, and our minds can really be kind of crazy at times, brings you back into your body, where things are typically much more safe, brings you back into the present moment. So, taking a pause and using that pause to take 3 slow, deep breaths can often be a game changer. I don't know if you found that. I certainly have.
Yes, I use a lot of breathing exercises and many more than
Mm,
normal in the last 4 months. So yes, I do.
yes,
Yes, I do.
and they're very helpful.
They are very helpful. So, one of the things we've been asking each of our guests on the podcast is twofold. One is to reassure anyone, even someone brand new to mindfulness or who has never, pursued this kind of a sort of path before, that it's not a fix all. We're all human. We all have human emotions. So, it's to really reassure people that, it's normal to feel what you're feeling and all feelings are valid, but mindfulness can help you better deal with or manage things the more you practice. And so the question we're asking all the guests is, you must experience anxiety or stress sometimes
Mm.
yourself. And when you do, what is your go-to? What is your practice to get yourself recentered or regrounded or calmer when that happens?
Mm. That's such a good question because just to respond to what you said at first, we all can become anxious. We all have emotions. We're human beings. Emotions are part of our life. And what I find very helpful is being kind to myself in those moments. Sometimes when I'm aware that my emotional temperature is rising and that anxiety or worry or fear is setting in, I've learned to just put my right hand over the area of my heart and say to myself, it's okay, in a kind, gentle voice. It's taken me a long time to learn how to do that. I had to reverse long-standing patterns that many of us have of going to judgment. Why am I feeling this? I shouldn't be. What's wrong with me? So now I just try to pay attention and notice and really just put my hand here, feel the same warm touch that I would give, let's say, to my son, in loving and affection, and just to simply say to myself, it's okay. That almost invariably brings down my temperature. And you know what? It's easy, it's free, and it's always available to me.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. I know that you coach physicians,
Hmm.
and I'm just curious. This just popped into my head because I'm involved with a lot of different mindfulness organizations, and we've all been talking about the huge increase in interest in mindfulness since the pandemic started. And I was wondering if you're seeing that in the medical field as well. Are doctors more open to mindfulness practices than they might have been pre-pandemic?
Without a doubt. It's been a sea change. Even 3, 5 years ago, the word mindfulness, people might snicker a little bit. Oh, what is that? That's for gurus. We doctors don't do that. But it's really been wonderful as our general society has accepted and, in fact, embraced all that mindfulness has to offer. Doctors and nurses and other healthcare workers are catching on. So, at many hospitals, there are mindfulness programs. My state medical association produced and used a lot of my meditations because they knew that during the time of COVID, physicians would need these kind of resources. So, in every institution now, mindfulness is really the norm. So, I think it's fantastic that it's coming to healthcare and being seen for all the tremendous value it can really be offering people.
That's wonderful news and very hopeful because I agree. I think that they may need it more than anybody, especially during this right now.
That's right.
They're under
That's
so
right.
much stress, and I'm
That's
I'm
right.
also thrilled. I mean, that's a I guess a good side effect of what's happened is that
Uh-huh.
so many people have been more open, and it's something that can
Yes.
serve them forever, not just in a crisis. But that's very hopeful to hear. So thank you for sharing that.
Oh, my pleasure.
I want to thank you so much for joining us today. I'm sure our listeners are going to be very appreciative of the information and will watch for your book, which again is Everyday Resilience. And again, something else we all need during these times. And this is the best time to start building something like that. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. It's really been a pleasure.
Stay safe.
Thank you. You too.